So, good afternoon. We have with us Professor Ash Narayan Roy. He's a PhD in International Studies from Jawaharlal University, Delhi. He spent more than 4 years at Mexico City as a visiting scholar in early 1980s. He worked with Hindustan Times as assistant editor from 1990 to 2001. In 1997, Roy was sent by the UN to Cairo and Amman as member of fact-finding news mission on the question of Palestine. In fact, 2012, he was a member of international team to observe parliamentary elections in Kuwait. He has participated and presented dozens of papers in international seminars and conferences on democracy, local government, federalism, globalization, and Indian foreign policy. In March 2005, Roy led a 34-member Indian local government delegation to Pakistan as part of Track 2 diplomacy. Roy has also been associated with the Iraqi federalism and East African federalism projects. Roy has presented papers on local governance and lecture on India-China relation in Nanki University and Shantanu University. He is author of The Third World in Age of Globalization and Globalization or Globalization, the Arab Experience. He has jointly edited a volume titled Local Governance, A Global Perspective. Presently, he is the Director, Institute of Social Sciences, New Delhi. I welcome Professor Ash Narayan Roy in the Department of Political Science and request him to continue his lecture. Thank you.
Let me first of all welcome all of you to this course. I'm quite happy that this course, this is, I suppose, is inaugural course, has attracted a fairly large number of participants, though not many of them have been able to join this year. I have been given a very big introduction. Let me add one more. I just came from Yemen. Yemen is not an easy place to go, and I was there for about 10 days. Yemen is presently going through national dialogue. You know, in the wake of the Arab Spring, there were movements, and the long-time leader had to concede power to his deputy. And it is an interim period where they are in the process of drafting their new constitution and having the national dialogue. So we were part of the international team in order to tell them how to go about local government or democracy or federal polity, unity in diversity, things like that and all that. So anyway, we will be talking about the Panchayati Raj, that is the local governance system in India. You would see the two very interesting quotes by Gandhi, because Gandhi was a great votary of local governance. And of course, as you will see, I will tell you how there were competing visions of Indian villages, whether it is Gandhi on the one hand and Ambedkar on the other. Let me, before I come to the Panchayati Raj, let me take you to a journey of what is happening across the world in terms of democratic structure being brought to face a new kind of citizens' empowerment. It is not just the Arab world or Asia, it is happening in Latin America, it is happening in the established democracies as well. People are not happy with what they have got. And the idea is that our democracy must deliver much more than what it has been doing. See, for instance, what is happening in Turkey. It's not that people are opposing democracy. They say, look, this is not enough. And same thing, whether it is India or many other countries, certainly in Latin America. So 21st century appears to be turning out as a citizens' engagement, where people have started having a say, demanding a say. And that's why the rights to be heard, to be respected, as well as to be seen, these are at the core of citizens' growing demand. And this has given a new meaning to democracy. Then you would also see that democracy is also moving towards equity and inclusion. Because what good is democracy if it doesn't provide equity? It doesn't include the various groups who traditionally remain on the margin. You have elections every 5 years and then you hand over power to another one. But there are groups, there have been countries, including in this country, where women were not able to have a sense of empowerment. And that's why, as we will see, how at the local level government, it had been introduced as some kind of a quota. So democracy is moving towards equity and inclusion. That is another phenomenon. What is happening to the representative democracy? Representative democracy appears to be a democracy which is captured by the elite. It is a democracy which is, something is wrong with the tech. Could be, yeah. Someone is calling, let me switch it off. That's very surprising. Okay, thank you. Many of the democracies have simply become polyarchies. And the business of government is privilege of the few. That is, I'm talking of representative democracy. It has also become a statist democracy. And finally, it is a democracy where the minorities and various groups on the margins remain excluded from the political process. And hence there is a demand to move from representative democracy to participatory democracy. And that is a movement that you see, and there is a context why we talk about it, because then we will see decentralization is part of that movement across the world, and that is exactly why we also had the Panchayati Raj system. With the deepening of democracy, governance is moving beyond governments. As they say, of course, in the context of foreign policy, that foreign policy is too important to be left to the diplomats or the foreign ministries. It has to include various other stakeholders, including the citizens. And that is happening in terms of local governance as well. What you see in the process is that a new geography of below is emerging, because people have started rising from below. And that is the crux of decentralization that we will see. Over the past few years, if not decades, there is also a displacement of power and control. It has happened at two levels. It has happened upward, downward, as well as outward. Now, what is upward? Suddenly you see that international agencies, whether it is the donor agencies, the UN or the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, they have started becoming a major factor, which has started putting its pressure that, look, you must decentralize, you must empower, for good or bad reasons. So that is something which is happening, which has also created sudden pressure on various countries. Then displacement of power below, that is downward. This is where the involvement of local community, empowerment of local government, and that is happening there. Then you have displacement of power outwards. This is where you will see the NGOs, the other civil citizens groups. So this is exactly the new nature that you see is emerging in terms of governance today. Then let's see what is the new pyramid of democracy that is now appearing. You will see suddenly citizens are becoming empowered and governments are becoming very weak. You can see what is happening even in India, that the central government seems to be, it's almost like lonely on top. And citizens say nothing less than this, how powerful it is becoming. The other day we had discussions from one French lady, and she was telling that nothing can be done today because the government has no mandate, because the citizens keep asking. So I think if you don't have a right kind of mandate, you can't do it. Things have come to such a pass that governments are becoming almost, paralyzed, particularly when you have unstable polity. So, that is the level of citizens' empowerment that you see, whether it is in Arab world or Latin America or Asia or even the Western democracies. Another thing is how public space is emptying at top and filling at the bottom. So the pyramid is it's not like this pyramid is, the base is becoming very strong. And finally, there is a withering away of institutional politics, and it is being replaced by politics of day-to-day concern. This is exactly what is happening, but I would like to see it as an effort to broaden citizenship. This is how I see it. Now, coming to decentralization, what are the various factors for decentralization? If you see The Economist, they had their own reasons to see decentralization and promote it, saying that, it is a way of shifting power away from centralized state. When it comes to the advocates of competitive politics, they regard it as a device to pry open the closed polities. And that's why you saw that it started the process in the 80s and all that, whether Brazil and many countries, including Pakistan, the military dictators started decentralizing. Then democratic leaders had their own reasons to accept decentralization across the world. More so, we are talking about the developing world, because they thought it was a way to make governance deeper, accountable, responsible. Even the autocratic leaders had their reasons to decentralize, because they were looking for certain legitimacy. So that's why, many dictators said, okay, democracy at the local level, fine, but not at the national level, because they were looking for some breathing space. And when it comes to the donor agencies were worried about where the money was going. So, okay, efficiency, what someone calls allocative efficiency, was the reason why donor agencies also started pushing for decentralized. Now, what is exactly decentralized? It means different things to different people. Some would say it is a direct form of democracy that engages citizens, which means what? Citizens have a voice as well as a choice. This is how decentralization will be viewed by some. Others will see it as a promoter of good governance. But remember one thing, Gandhi said that good governance is no substitute for self-government. And hence, you have to have self-government that will come through decentralization, and then, okay, you strive for good governance. Then it also ensures redistribution of power, like self-rule, but also shared rule. This is the spirit of the federal countries like India, which is so diverse, that you have the distribution of power at the central level, then the state level, and in some cases also local level. So shared rule as well as self-rule, that is the principle. Then decentralization is also seen as a potent instrument for deepening democracy, because how you can deepen democracy? By bringing in the marginalized who did not benefit otherwise from the traditional democratic setup. Decentralization is also seen as an instrument for responsive government, then to provide better access to citizens in order to include the groups, ethnic groups, minorities, women, and in our case, the so-called scheduled castes, the former untouchables, as well as the tribal groups. So this is how one sees the differently what decentralization comes to mean. But there is no single model of decentralization, which is very clear. And let's not look for any perfect model. In fact, let us look for less imperfect model. I mean, that is exactly what Amartya Sen says, that one should never look for the perfect model because it doesn't exist. Now coming to the, now we'll come to the Indian narrative, that is the Indian local government system. You see, it is a new avatar of the local government system, which explains the massive change that took place in '93 after the two major amendments were brought about to the Indian Constitution by the Congress government, and Rajiv Gandhi was the main instrument, even though his government failed to get it approved. But the next government did it, and that has become a new kind of a milestone in Indian democracy in terms of its new structure that has been sought to be created. Now, there were, of course, panchayats, the local government institutions in India, even earlier time, including during the British colonial era. You had the local government system, and it was in some kind of a pivot of administration, some kind of center of social life, also some social solidarity. But what happened that thanks to the ruthless system of revenue collection, that got killed. So you could not move. Otherwise, we always had traditionally, no one knows when exactly panchayat began and all that. At some level, panchayat, as you know, it comes from the word panch. Panch is five. So there are five people, five wise men, decided and all that. It's a different matter that it was primarily caste-oriented and those who dominated and all that. But there was some mechanism that existed for long. That is the idea. Now, there were experiments made even before the 1992. There were two major committees that the central government had set up in order to suggest what kind of structure should India have in terms of its decentralized polity, or what we call the Panchayati Raj. In 1957, the Balwant Rai Mehta Committee had been set up to look into how the community development program was doing, whether it was doing or not, because Nehru had an idea to start community development, that is basically the village development, and it came out with the suggestion that there should be three-tier structure. Then in 1977, you had another big committee called Ashok Mehta Committee, which suggested only two-tier structure. But what happened is that for lack of funds, for lack of clarity of roles, as well as for advocism, the whole experiment could not be carried out. So, in a sense, the panchayats remained an agency of implementing some of these schemes. But what has the new one done is to create a new level of government. That is more important. It's not simply bureaucracy which will collect revenue. It is meant to be the third tier of government, and that makes it much more viable. Coming to the Panchayati Raj, how the whole we are into the 20th. We have completed 20 years of the new generation of panchayats. Of course, Simon, you can say that there is an effort to create a new chemistry of politics, a new grammar of politics that you suddenly see in India today. Let me tell you, before these amendments, in this vast country, we had at best 6,000 people who were elected to national parliament as well as to the state parliaments, what we call the assembly, state assemblies. Now you can imagine, okay, today we have a 1 billion plus, but then even if it was 600 million or 800 million, you had only 6,000 people who represented you. And you can imagine what kind of pyramid it was. After the 73rd Amendment, what has happened is, today we have 3.4 million elected representatives, out of which more than 1 million are women, thanks to the quota system that will come later to discuss it. That how the whole structure of governance is changing. Now remember one thing, this 3.4 million number is larger than all the people elected to various bodies in the entire world. We are not talking of China, of course, because China also has some kind of local government, but then it's not democratic structure. Now that is the meaning of it, that how you have sought to create a level of governments. It may not be functioning very well today, but then this is the base, and tomorrow it has to, because we are not talking only of today, we are talking of the future as well. So this is the structure. Now coming to the two stories, you will see that one story is of great success, and another story could be kind of a big disappointment. It's very natural that you will see that when it is functioning well. Where it is not functioning, it is very disastrous. I mean, that is the sad part of it. Now this success or otherwise of the Panchayati Raj system has to be analyzed at three levels. One is representation, second is participation, and the third is empowerment. Now, it represents the people. So, okay, so the large number of people are getting representation. That is one big element. Then participation. They have started participating in the democratic process, in the decision making. To what extent and all that, that we are going to see. And the third will be that it is a way to empower the historically disempowered. So the power to the people is exactly what is behind this kind of an experiment. So we have seen how the global process of decentralization happens and how the same current is followed here also when the effort is to create the third tier of government. And let me tell you that today, internationally, the Indian local government system is in great demand. People want to come and learn from it, then how it is happening or not happening. There are many countries which have tried to adopt it, but then they have not been able to give that kind of a large number of quota or create, okay, you have been given some power to deliver the services and things like that and all that. But to create a new level of government, that dynamism is something which is very interesting. Empowering the large number of people, that is the real essence of democracy. And in that respect, there is a lot of people who are looking at the Indian model, because we at the Institute keep getting experts and others who want to come and see how Indian system is working or otherwise. So thanks to these instruments that have been created, you could see that the governance is becoming deeper, more structured down. It is also moving towards greater accountability, if not transparency as yet. That is one positive side of it. The other story is one of denial and humiliation, even violence against the elected representative, particularly when they are women and they are from the scheduled castes or scheduled tribes or simply poor. So that the two stories are moving in progress, and that's why I would say that the journey of the Panchayati Raj over the last 20 years is still a work in progress. There have been various studies conducted by the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, many other institutions, including our own center. Our institute has also come out with studies, or simply the studies done by individual scholars. And they have come out with very interesting points, and that we are going to see that. The study that we have done is called Inclusion and Exclusion of Local Governance. This has been published by the SAGE. We got the big fund from Ford Foundation, and they supported our efforts. So it spread over 3 years, and we conducted in 12 states the field visit to all these people. Scholars spent several months in the village just to see how things are. So I will come to that a little later. When this 73rd amendment was introduced, we also had another amendment called 74th, which was primarily for the urban area, because India is one country where you have the two different systems of local government. One is for the village, another is for urban centers. But in countries like Brazil and others, even a small village have municipality, because after all it is a local community. But because India is primarily a country of villages, we have 600,000 villages. This is possibly one of the few countries where still 70% people still live in the village. That's why we thought that let's have two structures, one for rural India, one for urban. But it is the same principle, that local government should be empowered. In other countries, you have only one name. We have rural plus urban. That is only it. Now, what were the three major assumptions when this was sought to be brought about? There were three assumptions. One, that it would prove to be a potent instrument in the hands of the poor and the marginalized. So that instrument will help them to empower themselves. That is one assumption. The second assumption was that it will engender social justice, because social justice can come when there is equity in society in terms of various communities also having a sense of partnership, to create stakeholders in society. That was the objective. The third was self-government will lead to good governance. So there were the three key assumptions when these changes were sought to be brought about. Then now that we are sitting to decide what was the contribution, what are the achievements, in a way we are trying to evaluate. I am reminded of a very famous dialogue between China's then Premier Zhou Enlai now, and André Malraux, a great intellectual writer from France. Both were having discussion about how do we evaluate the French Revolution. And obviously it was happening in the 1970s. They came out with the conclusion that it is too early to evaluate the French Revolution since it happened only 200 years ago. That is another way of looking at it. I'm not saying that we should go by that, but I still believe that perhaps it is still too early to pass definitive judgment about whether the system has failed or not. That is the point I'm saying. What has happened in the Indian case is that except for some states, most of the states are still in the process of devolving power and functions to these bodies. You see, the panchayat is a state subject in India. There is central legislation, but center cannot impose its will on the states because the states are autonomous, because they are federal setup. So states have also introduced their own legislations in conformity with the central law, but then they are going by their own speed. So while Kerala, which is a very good performing state, has devolved all the 29 powers that the constitution talks about, the primary health or agriculture or education and small road construction and things like that. Other states are sitting pretty, someone is saying that, okay, you are not incompetent as yet, that we cannot trust you. There is also domination of the central authorities called IAS officer that we have, administrative officer, the bureaucracy. So somehow the lack of trust is coming in the way. So unless you devolve these functions, unless you train them, many of them got elected from areas, they have come from very humble background. Many of them are not even properly educated. They have never been exposed to mixing with a large number of people, particularly women. They were kind of very traditional and all that. So that being the case, the panchayat structure that we have may appear to have the pillars and walls, but not yet sufficient roof. And that is the scenario, and that's why it is still, the panchayat representatives are still growing wings to fly. This is how I would like to look at while evaluating how the Panchayati Raj seems to have done, how the 20-year journey of this new governance structure has to be analyzed. There are people who will say that, yes, reservation has worked to the advantage of the underprivileged groups, but simply placing them in positions of power do not make them powerful. This is one line of analysis, and I think to a large extent it is very true. But in 2004, there was a very major study which says that if the position of village council head is reserved for people from the former untouchables, more than 7% households are likely to get access to toilet because their priorities are different, because they have traditionally been oppressed. So the moment they are in positions of power, they want there should be a school for girls nearby so that the girls do go to schools and not have dropouts. Many girls do not go to some of the schools because there are no toilet, so there should be toilet and things like that. So the priority of women as well as those who are from the underprivileged enjoying the quota system has been very different wherever they have been able to do that. So that is the positive that we see in the Panchayati Raj system. Now let's come to the 73rd, which is a very major milestone, because it has become part of the Indian Constitution. This chapter in the Indian Constitution is most comprehensive in the Indian Constitution, which charts out the whole detail, the roadmap, how to empower and all that. And it is also appreciated because no other constitution talks so comprehensively about empowering the local government institutions. So that is the beauty of this structure. And as I have been telling, that the idea is to create the third tier of democracy. And the third tier in a way becomes the first tier of democracy, because if democracy has to grow from below, if it has to go bottom up, it has to be the first tier. Why do we see? I remember once I was talking to the ambassador of Uruguay in Delhi, and I saw the map of Latin America kept just from the other side. So you could see Chile and Argentina on top, and United States, Canada down. He says that why must we see the map the other way? So I think it was an effort to kind of see it, how there is a bottom-up approach in a way, So that being the case, yes, in the end, the local government institutions should become the first tier of democracy. That should be the thing. Now, what are the other provisions that are very important to bear in mind is that seats have been reserved. In many other countries, you have the quota system, but that quota is only at the level of parties. You see, various parties decide to nominate, could be mostly in the case of women or some groups who are otherwise not getting represented, in the party nomination. But we have gone a step further. The seats themselves, which means what? Suppose Jamia is a constituency. If Delhi has various, and Jamia is one, so if it is reserved, then only women will contest, no matter which party, Congress, Marxist, this, that, only women will contest and only they will get elected. Or only the former untouchable and things like that. So that is a new stage of giving a quota system. Now, there is another element. So that quota says that not less than 1/3 of all seats in local government will be going to women. Then 15% seats have been reserved for the scheduled caste, who are the former untouchable, because that is the percentage, their percentage in the country, population. And 8% for tribal, because that is the percentage of tribal population in the country. But today, more than 50% of Indian states have reserved 50% quota for women. So you can see the moment you go to a panchayat, you see 50% women, no matter how educated they are and all that. It's a change, because numbers matter. When there is a meeting of the council and you see 50% women, they will shout. I mean, you can't take them for granted. There was a time when you will lecture, they will keep accepting. We at the Institute of Social Sciences, we have been organizing elected women's convention every year. And we see the amount of confidence they have gained, even though they may not have gone to the formal school and college. They can at best write their names and all that. So this is this level of empowerment that you will see, because a large number of women participating in these institutions have started learning how to govern. There are a lot of problems, many hindrances, no doubt, but that is the spirit in which it is being accepted, and it is also changing the whole thing. Another feature of that change is that the posts of chairpersons have also been reserved. So it's not that, okay, you have the 30-member council, so you elect, say, 30% women. No. All the heads of these councils and subheads will also go to them. So that is an effort to really provide a kind of quota which is much more inclusive, much more empowering. So that is another aspect. Now, these are many of the details, but then there's no need to go into it. Now let's talk about the new local government system. How do we look at it? Well, it is constitutionally mandated. So it's not simply that is the government passed an order and then it has been done. No, it is part of the constitution. So no one can touch it. It has been made part of the constitution. So that is the beauty of it. In many countries, there is administrative order or for some convenience you decide to give some power to the local bodies, but it is not necessarily in every country that it has been made part of the constitution. So that is one part. And of course, the effort is to seek a new paradigm of governance so that there is a deepening of democracy at the grassroots level. But as we see, the reality on the ground is not all lily white. You have a lot of problems. As I was hinting at early, there are incidents of violence, though much less today. Then there are efforts to not allow them to function. Then many other groups who feel that these groups are getting empowered at their cost have devised a new formula to pass a vote of no confidence and throw them out. There are various efforts to undermine that empowerment of the newly empowered group. So that is another reality that I want you to bear in mind. What this reservation of seats has done is to kind of open a new door of revolutionary change. That suddenly you see that how these people have started demanding a new say in governance, and that is giving voice to the people who were otherwise unheard or ignored. I say that is the essence of it. So to that extent, it is a process of deepening of democracy. The Institute of Social Sciences, where I am working, organized a big project I was telling you, involving 12 states, and they came out with some of the important findings after studying to what extent these elements got included in the democratic process. One conclusion was that the floodgates have now been opened and there is no way you can close it. So that is a very positive view that you see that. Then also there is a great deal of diversity that you see. How some states have done very well, but others haven't done. Now that is because of the level of political awareness, level of education, and in some cases, certain governments, say for instance Kerala, the Marxist government was much more committed to democratic decentralization for various reasons. And that tradition has been continued by the Congress government also. So even though these two parties have been alternating in power, but then they have continued. And you can see the best performing model right now in that state, where 30% of the budget is allocated directly to the local government. They decide how to run the municipality and things of the kind, which is not happening in other. Then you have the states in between and things like that. So it's a kind of a very mixed picture that you see. The ISS study also says that occupying positions of power is not enough. You have to create them a sense of ability to influence decision making, and that is the real test. So capacity enhancement, capacity building, which is much more important, because if you don't do, they are not going to enjoy the fruits of power. Another finding is that how the dominant caste groups are trying to undermine their functioning. In some cases, women will not be allowed to sit in the chair in front of, it happens in Haryana, which is next door, it's so close to Delhi, that they will not be allowed to sit in the chair, they will have to sit on the floor, and they're not allowed to function and all that. So you have all kinds of limitations that you see in the way of real empowerment. Then there is the midterm review by the Panchayati Raj Ministry. The ministry, for the first time in 2004, this ministry has been created, the Ministry of Local Government. Earlier it was part of rural development. So they decided that, okay, we have now 10 plus years, let us see how far things have worked or not worked, and what are the kind of ways in which it can be made to work. And this is exactly what they have come out with. So some of the findings are, and I will read one particular part. It says here that how the meaning, nature and scope of public participation have shifted. That's a very positive point. earlier, political participation meant simply voting or simply standing for elections. Now it is the agenda of good governance. I think this is exactly how things have happened. At the same time, the same review done by the government also admits that to accept that now the truly representative and responsible governance at the local level has emerged is not true. So they are also talking of various impediments in the way. Then you have another expert committee, I think it's not mentioned here. Mr. Manishankar Iyer was the local government minister. He was also a very close friend of Rajiv Gandhi. It seems he was the one who advised him to go for Panchayati Raj. And he was made the minister, and right now he is not the minister, but then he was made a chair of one of the experts committee to say, what are the kind of suggestions that we should have. So his committee has come out with various arguments. One such thing is that there should be another Panchayat commission to look into various aspects. He is also suggesting that there should be single local government at the district level rather than 3-tier and all that, because so that and he's also in favor of merging the municipal and rural, so that there is not so much diversification, and then the decisions can be taken. There are various other things. He talks of new roadmap. He talks of activity mapping and things like that. So you see, the idea is that any country, in order to create a new system, must have the ability to invent and reinvent. Unless you constantly invent and reinvent, things can simply, you can't take it for granted. And that is a good thing that has happened in this country, even in terms of overall democracy. Let me tell you that in the 1950s and 60s in this country, if you looked around, I think some of these top ministers and important positions, those who held, belonged to a certain caste. They were traditionally, a dominant caste. They had better education. They had the properties and all that. Today, that is changing because the process has been on. What India has done, and that is a positive take that students from other countries should take, is that India has been trying to expand the national cake. Since more and more groups are wanting to have a share in the cake, if you don't expand the cake, then how are you going to distribute? So not only you are creating space for many others so that they become stakeholders, you are also expanding and replenishing the cake. And that is a very good example. And that's why, if you see that in the 20 years, there have been various efforts to analyze what has gone wrong, how it can become much more effective and viable. That's why various studies, including by the government and ministries, so that we keep inventing and keep learning from mistakes. We do commit mistakes. In fact, Gandhi used to say that unless we are allowed the freedom to also commit mistake, freedom is not worth having. He went to the extent of saying that freedom is not worth having if it doesn't include the freedom to commit mistake. So we do commit mistakes, but then we must learn from mistakes. So that is the effort that has happened. Some of the final thoughts, which has not been written there. There is a lot of corruption that is being talked about at the level of panchayat, and many people, particularly the urban people, will say, oh, there is so much corruption has been decentralized. Maybe it is true, but then here the point is that panchayats draw the people from the same pool as others. How is it that you expect panchayats to work wonders without giving them enough power, but you don't expect the same parameters from members of parliament and others? Now that is not done. Okay, if there is corruption, because there is corruption everywhere else. So let's not say that, okay, since there is corruption, so allow the baby to be thrown with the bath water. No, there is no way you can avoid this, because if your democracy has to be sustainable, you have to strengthen this democracy. Because India is a country where, I mean, you can't rule from center or states. You have to decentralize. This everyone else is doing this. Even in smaller countries in Europe and all that, local governments are functioning so well, because local government can do things much better because they are close to the people. They know what is wrong, and that is in theory the right thing to do that. So that is exactly what I would say. It's also important to create, enhance their capability, and that's why the need for training. There have been studies which will tell you that if you have trained them, they are able to perform much better. Now, another thing has happened is that more and more educated women have started joining this group, because, it's already 20 years. So the better educated ones are able to assert their authority. They also they also understand the rules and all that. So these are some of these positive talks. There's nothing wrong with the institution. If some of these things haven't worked, it is because effort has not been made to enable them to make the best of this. If things have not worked, the system cannot be faulted, and that is the point that I'm trying to say there. When it comes to the quota, there are 40 countries in the world which have introduced gender quota, not only at the local level but also at the national level. There are 50 countries which have some percentage or the other of quota through political parties. So it is a global practice. So to say that, okay, quota is bad, no, we can't accept it. It is accepted globally. And that is a reality. So I think this is one very well established way to empower those disempowered, because if you have to create a society which is more equitable, you have to take everyone along. Then it's also a realization that if you want inclusive governance, this has to be, if you want inclusive growth, you have to also have inclusive governance. Inclusive governance will come only by decentralizing power. The decentralized governance can be effective only at the local level. You can't have that at the national level. That is one. Plus, maximum devolution will lead to maximum democracy, and that is exactly what is all about. That unless you devolve power, unless you create capacity building, I think things may not happen. Now, the last word before we come to the question is, you are all familiar with E.M. Forster, a great British or English writer, who wrote a piece called Two Cheers for Democracy, where he says that, he talked about democracy globally and more so in the West. He said that we may still contrive to raise 3 cheers for democracy, though at present it deserves only 2 cheers. I think the same is true of the local government, that they deserve only 2 cheers and not 3 cheers, but things are moving in the right direction, and it is happening globally, and this is exactly what is important. Because if you don't move from representative to participatory, you will see what is going to happen. Let me tell you what is happening even in Latin America. The indigenous, the original inhabitants of most of the countries have asserted themselves in a big way. Even in Canada. In Canada, there is a movement called Idle No More. This is a movement of the indigenous who have stopped the transportation of logs and all that, saying that, look, if you want to preserve nature, you have to trust us, because we have been living with nature for thousands of years. We are your best bet. So that level of assertion is happening. Even in Latin America, as I was telling you, there are groups who said, look, we must have a development model which is more responsive, which is more in harmony with nature, which is more leading to sustainable development. I think this is the kind of voice that we hear from the world. And in that context, I think the Indian local government is a very noble attempt to democratize democracy, if I can use the word, because this is the only way And if you don't, then your national democracy itself will be in jeopardy. With these words, I conclude, and thank you very much, and you can ask questions.
One other question.
Yeah.
In terms of funding for these local governments, I just a bit unclear on that because all government requires funds and money to work with. It was 30% of the state budget, but can you just elaborate on that because that's how they around the world in Australia.
Yeah. That's a very, very good point. Because in fact, this is one of the big limitations of the Indian local government. Because particularly those based in rural India, they are a very small community. You have something like 5,000 people and then you have one panchayat. Now, 5,000 people, say 2 villages or 3 villages or even 1 village, that village is predominantly rural. Its source of income is very limited. So the taxing ability of these authorities is also very limited. And that's a big minus point. And hence they depend on funds from the center as well as from states. They have started raising a little bit like some movement of vehicles, semi-urban areas and all that. But in states like Kerala, where it is getting more urbanized, they are able to raise, may not be enough. So that is a big limitation. And why local government institutions are very successful, say in Europe and all that, because they are able to raise good funds and they function very well. Here it is a big limitation. So, someone else's money, you are very happy, doing it. You also don't want, particularly in the municipal level, where they can raise a lot of funds because municipalities, big towns have, but then they become very populist because they don't want to raise tax. And at the same time, they are very happy demanding money from the national government. So I think this is a big limitation. We may have to find a way because, you can't simply depend on doles and all that. And if you depend, then central will manipulate. This is exactly what is happening. There are a lot of funds from the central government for fighting poverty, to creating infrastructure in the rural India, for health, sanitation, housing, a lot of money being spent. Now, since the center cannot give directly, so it goes through the states. And then there is a competition who takes the credit and all that. And then they can also monitor and then manipulate. They could say, look, if you don't do this, we will not give you. So they are also becoming kind of a very dependent on such funds. But, if you remain dependent, then you won't be able to exercise autonomy. So I think that is a major impediment, and I think excellent question. I was also kind of, I thought I wanted to say, but then I didn't, that how in terms of rural India and its place in the country, there are competing visions. You had Gandhi, who always said, in fact, Gandhi used to say that go to villages, for there lives the soul of India. This was his view. Ambedkar countered it. He was one of the leading voices of the constitution. He says, look, village is a sink of, narrow-mindedness and communalism. He said that it's something which is virtually stinking. He saw that people of certain castes were discriminated and all that. So he said no. So that kind of a vision was there. So much so that despite Gandhi speaking so much of panchayats, in fact, Gandhi called them village republics. It's a very interesting word. He says that the panchayats are village republics. And the idea was that, how India will be 600,000 village republics and all that. So that was that idealism that he was talking about. But Ambedkar said no. And that's why possibly when the constitution was being drafted, panchayat word did not figure. And Gandhi got very upset and others. And then, finally they put it in as part of directive principles of state policy, which cannot be justiciable. So, that vision has been there, that whether you wanted that scheme or not and all that. But anyway, in today's context, it's very much established, and we are happy that has happened, because there is another context which I think you should know, that in 1975, for the first time, Indian democracy was suspended. And I remember I was listening to Voice of America, which said, at that time, not much television, it said that it is the United States now which is the largest democracy, no more India, because India was no more considered democracy. After democracy was restored, 18 months gap, then there was a lot of pressure from civil society to decentralize. And that's why this whole movement came, and ultimately these power to the people, decentralized governance, and all that we have talked about happened. I think there was a right spirit to take it. Otherwise, Indian democracy was fine. The West always patted India. Okay, you're doing great, guy. China is not. Africa is collapsing. Indonesia is collapsing. Pakistan, Bangladesh are collapsing. Only India is raising the banner of democracy. But was it enough? It was not, because we saw how it led to concentration of power and creation of leaders like Indira Gandhi, who became dictatorial. So today it can't. So today, in fact, that's why I was saying that how today our governments have become very weak, citizens are becoming empowered. That is the right way. And mind you, India has had the golden era of growth in the last 20 years when we had no powerful government. Now that's the beauty of it. So a country like India, some element of political instability, some element of political administrative mess is good, because it leads to innovation. It did not happen in China. In China, let me give you an example, because people often compare India and China. 400 to 500 years ago, China had developed the technology to make steel, also technology to make ships, as well as printing press. But it decided to keep it a secret. He says, don't tell anyone, because the world will get to know. They sat over it for more than 200 years, till such time industrial revolution happened in England, and not there. So, sitting over something which you have and all that, because it was a closed society. And India, on the other hand, was always chaotic, functioning anarchy and all that. That led to great entrepreneurship. People have become entrepreneurs because of the crisis. So crisis leads to innovation, including democratic innovation. So I think this is also something which is very interesting. Many of you are from other countries and all that. So I thought that this point is important.